This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Agronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again. Time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 127. And tonight, I am joined by Ashgar.
Hello.
Grace.
Hello.
Tam.
Hello.
And Phelan.
Hello.
We are missing Akodra because he is at Geek Girl Con? I think that's the name of the con?
Yes.
And our good friend of the show, Lior and Erlaid, are set up as vendors, which I kind of wish I was able to see. It would be amazing. So, what was it? A couple weeks ago, you talked a little bit about Guild Wars 2, Tam?
Yeah.
So, you went back, and I had not kind things to say about the game. Because, I have kind of a checkered past with this game. And more than anything, I always felt like I didn't get it. I didn't get what people saw in it.
Mm-hmm. I had the same thing.
And I guess to some extent this week that changed in that I finally understand at least why people would stay. What content other than I compared the game to a busy book, which is probably not the kindest comparison, but for those who don't know the term, a busy book is like this thing that you give little kids that's got, snaps and zippers and, pockets and things to keep them busy in a car ride.
Like a fidget toy.
Yeah, a fidget toy. And, for the most part, Guild Wars 2 felt like this busy book. There's all this stuff for you to do, but none of it necessarily felt like it was super meaningful. It was a bunch of little bite-sized content nuggets that didn't really lead up to much of anything other than unlocking new skills and gaining levels and things like that. And when we initially played this game, ages ago, at launch, I think we had come up with the decision that must be why people wanted to play it, because you could hop in and play it for a few minutes and feel like you did something, even though it really wasn't a huge thing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Well, and I remember one of the things that we said about it at the time was, this feels like a game. I remember the comment that I think you had, and I think Kodra had, was, this feels like a game that once you realize that there's nothing going on in it, it stops being fun.
Yes.
And we felt like, and I it's hard for me to say whether at the time it was like this. But definitely we came back to it and felt like we still feel like we realized there wasn't anything going on with it.
Right. Well, and honestly, a big part of what hurt us and caused at least one of us to just log out instantly and never come back was our first dungeon experience.
Yeah. Oh, God.
And honestly, it just felt like a mess. It was this chaotic, zergy thing that literally rezzing and death zerging was a way we got through a couple of the bosses. Because the mechanics weren't, clearly communicated. It just didn't feel like we could really grasp the way to do these fights other than just go straight forward and keep rezzing up and going back into the fight. And
it was really hard to tell if the problem was these fights don't have mechanics or we lack the tools to deal with the mechanics. But either way, it wasn't satisfying.
Right. And honestly, I did research to try and figure out, okay, how do you do these dungeons? And the real answer was people glitched the hell out of them. They figured out you could stand in this place and never get hit by attacks, or if you did this, the boss logic would just break and you could beat it up and get easy loot. And that was super prevalent in the Guild Wars 2 community, was glitching dungeons. And if you went into a dungeon and you didn't know how to glitch it, there were segments of the population that were kind of aggressive about, you not knowing your job.
Yeah, like, don't pull that pack, it's a waste of time.
Exactly. And, to some extent the other day, we experienced this too, where some of the stuff just straight one-shots you. Like there are some mechanics that in the dungeons that will just straight up wreck you, and there's nothing you can do. Like fire. Fire is definitely a thing that will gleefully kill you. But in I don't know how many years have passed since it released.
4.
They've really tweaked and changed the group play, because we've done. So the first thing we did was Fractals, and I don't even know how to describe Fractals.
I feel like Fractals are they're like the weird love child of Diablo Rifts and like Borderlands bosses.
I feel like Bell's comparison was a good one. They're really comparable to the DDO adventurers.
Yeah, that's another good one.
Neverwinter is also still structured that way. Mostly. Partly.
But much higher fidelity and with a lot more interesting stuff going on. I mean, so for I guess specificity, like we've done 3 of them. We've done 3 of the Fractals. The first Fractal we went into was a pretty standard, and I think only Ash and I and Belle have done it. But it's this pretty standard, move through this space, kill a bunch of dudes, make your way to the bosses, fight relatively straightforward bosses, and collect rewards at the end. Like mostly pretty simple stuff. Although there's a lot of like madness going on that you needed to know like how to deal with, and some really annoying ballistas. And that was like the least interesting one of the ones we did. The second one was this swamp that we went into. And the very first thing that we run into is this door that closes on us, and we need to collect wisps on a timer and bring them back to the door to reopen it. And it's a really tight timer. Like, we weren't really communicating, so we split up, and it turned out that was probably the best thing we could have done.
Right. Well, and like, admittedly, we one-shot that mechanic, but we barely did it. I think there were like 2 seconds left.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and part of what made that difficult was there's all these little traps. And the traps don't kill you, they just knock you over, or snare you. They're kind of annoying. But when you're on a timer to go and grab these things and bring them back, and you miss a trap, you're losing precious time. And this thing that was just like oh god, I got tripped again, annoying, became like an actual mechanic that you had to really think about. Plus, every time
also about halfway through that, the boss showed up to harass us.
Yeah, that was the other thing. The boss of that section pops in and starts like throwing axes or whatever at you, and then stealths and vanishes. And you have just enough time to be like, oh god, what was that? What's going on? And then he's gone. So it's like he's not necessarily super threatening, but definitely this thing that you've got to worry about, along with the random jungle mobs.
Like, in WoW terms, I think the closest content type that they remind me of is like the heroic scenarios that existed during Pandaria, where it's not just a boss fight, it's other stuff's going on, and you have to make your way through a little scenario. And, I mean, to some extent, like, the artifact weapons and stuff in this expansion are that way as well, but there's a lot of things going on, and it's more like a pen and paper adventure than a dungeon run that's, start to finish.
Yeah, they're like a little one-shot mini adventure. I mean, the third one we did was entirely underwater, and it's worth noting that Guild Wars 2 has some of the only non-eye-gougingly terrible underwater combat I've ever seen. But, like, there was some pretty standard underwater fare, and then there's a bit where we go into the deep water, and if you don't have a light with you in the deep water, you get eaten by piranhas.
Or something.
Something in the dark eats you.
That was the most claustrophobic experience I've had in a game in a while, was trying desperately to swim to the next light to keep from getting eaten. And then
like, sticking really, really close together as you move through this space. Because like you've got the light comes from these plants, and you can pick the plant, but then you're moving with the plant.
and
Sadly, the plant doesn't stay alive for very long.
right,
Yeah,
right.
the plant doesn't stay alive very long once you picked it.
So underwater grooves from the sound of it.
Very much,
basically.
yeah. The darkness attacks you. Actually, it's like the things from Doctor Who. I forget the name of them. That the living shadows. God, what were those things called? Because basically,
But
yeah,
yes.
like the second you step into the shadows.
Without a light, you get eaten by a grue.
Yep.
And it slowly escalated. Like there started to be fewer and fewer. Like at first there was tons of little light plants, and then the light plants were further and further apart. And then there were a couple of places, and then they started introducing enemies that you had to like either pull to the light or rush to the light and fight while staying in the light. And then there were a couple of leaps of faith where we couldn't see the next light, but we kind of knew the direction we had to go in.
Because you could see like a slight shimmer in the distance to where there should be a light that direction. And then I remember like there was a certain point at which we started encountering mob types that knocked us back, which could be super deadly if we get knocked back out of the light.
So we had to start being really careful about where and how we'd engage these mobs. And then it culminated with a giant jellyfish. Like we beat the shit out of a giant jellyfish.
Like really, really horrible jellyfish. Like
Yeah,
not
that felt like an apology for how awful the rest of the place was.
Yeah, I mean, that boss wasn't that hard. I mean, the swamp thing ended with this really interesting, like, I don't know, minor swamp deity that we fought. Where
it's
we
like
had to,
like a giant ghost dragon-y kind of thing.
Yeah, some kind of like ghost.
Creatures in this game are weird.
Yes, it was this. Yeah, there's this ghost like tree dragon. But it wouldn't take any damage until we drew it into these circles that would pop up that would strip it of its ghostness, and then we'd, fight it until the circle went away.
And that fight reminded me a lot of Zamail Darkhold, where you're constantly moving to the next puddle of safeness.
Yeah, like the eye boss.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same concept, except with a lot more to worry about, because Sky had also ads that had similar protections.
Yeah. So he would swarm you with ads who you also had to pull into the circle and kill really quick.
So, like, another big problem that I had at launch was this was very much a game that catered to DPSers. Like, anyone that had a DPS player fantasy could totally find something that they enjoyed, and it was very much a game that allowed DPS to not need to rely on anyone else. Like, you could do everything by yourself. You didn't need a traditional Holy Trinity group because, this was the game that was going to abolish Trinities or abolish roles. And that didn't work at all.
They walked way back on that one.
They walked away. Yeah. And this time around, there is healing, there is tanking, and like my character is shockingly tanky.
Yeah.
That said, it still doesn't really let you stand in front of anything and just beat on it. Well, to certain limits of anything, I guess. There's a lot of things you can stand in front of and beat on if you're just a warrior.
Well, and there are a lot of moments where even then I had to dodge away and kite for a little bit while I healed myself up, or...
Yeah. There were, like, you could take a lot more punishment than any of the rest of us, or most of the rest of us. But it wasn't,
and when I threw on shield and mace, like, I became significantly tankier.
Yeah. But there was still stuff that you had to, get out of the way of.
Right. I couldn't just stand in one spot and tank and spank.
Yeah. Which I tend to think is probably good.
Well,
like,
I mean, and
even tanking more interesting.
Even traditional MMOs are moving away from that. Like, there are not a lot of modern fights that are just stand in one spot and take it. Like, even the mythics that we ran tonight in World of Warcraft, I had to fidget a lot to keep from dying. Because there's always something that makes the tank move. Even if it's just to reposition things to where the DPS aren't going to get killed.
Yeah.
So that was Fractals. And we also did exploration mode of one or two of the dungeons.
One.
Just one. Yeah, the dungeons have...
We inadvertently did 2 paths of it out of 3, but...
Yes. They basically have these story mode dungeons you have to do the story mode before you can do the explorable mode. But the story mode is like I'm not really sure what they're catering to. We're
intended to do them as you level up, and they fill in the story of what's going on with Destiny's Edge while
you're leveling up.
You are doing your personal story.
Got it. Okay. I mean, I guess that sort of makes sense. But we only did the story mode of the first dungeon and found it not very appealing.
It was not fun. This was still, like, the state of the game was a little different. Like,
yeah.
Basically all characters died in 2 or 3 hits, regardless of how defensive you were trying to be. So in dungeons, that meant to a boss, you died in 1 hit.
Yeah.
And the problem is like, if you were bringing melee, you were really making the wrong decision.
Wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. Everybody was supposed to kite.
Yeah, and so it turned to this weird thing where you had 5 people all trying to kite one boss, and it wasn't... And mostly failing.
Well, and ultimately, like, why I settled on Hammer as a warrior was I tanked, but I tanked by stunning the boss.
Yeah.
Like, I would constantly, like, there are 3 abilities that a Hammer warrior, which is the 2-handed hammer, can do, and that was all I did, was, like, I made sure I could stun it every time it got up and did something. And that was the correct way to get through dungeons.
I'm pretty sure break bars didn't exist yet, but I don't remember
they
how
didn't.
instead.
Bosses were just straight up stunnable.
Yeah, they were either just straight up stunnable, or they had a small number of stacks of can't be stunned that would go away as you tried to stun them, which was not a good mechanic.
But, like, generally speaking, the appropriate way to do these dungeons was to have, like, a Hammer Warrior, and I don't remember what the equivalent for Guardians was that had their stuns.
Also
but, like,
Hammer.
You alternated back and forth, so Warrior would stun this one, Guardian would stun the next one, and by doing that, that would keep their cannot be stunned stack off.
Guardians don't actually have a whole lot of stuns. I think they have a knockback on the hammer, and that's as close as they come.
I remember there being some sort of mechanic where, like, the Guardian definitely had to stun it every so often to reset the stack. Kind of like, if you remember the PvP fight in Crusaders Coliseum, you would swap targets off because it would eventually become taunt immune. So, like, that was the strategy that we used when we quote-unquote tanked that fight, is we would start on a target and, like, I would taunt until it became taunt immune, and then I would swap with one of the other tanks and keep taunting it until it became taunt immune, because Warrior Taunt was reading as different than Paladin Taunt or Death Knight Taunt. And I think early Guild Wars 2, like, my stun had a different stack than the Guardian stun.
Yeah. But what we got in the explorable was this. It sort of opens up, and then you get a chance to choose which path you want to go down, so you can play them multiple times and get different experiences. And we seem to be able to do 2 of the 3 branches.
And I think that was just luck, because one of the branches took us through an area that the resolution of the other branch was in.
So it just kind of spawned on us while we were doing it, which was actually kind of bullshit.
Yeah, it was frustrating as hell. Like, we walk into this chamber, and then all of a sudden this NPC summons a bunch of shit on us.
Yeah, that was not great.
I think that was mostly unintended bad scripting.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But it had, like, a couple of events. It had some traps that legitimately got us a few times. Like,
we maybe as an entire party all walked into the same trap and died the first time.
Yes. It wasn't our finest moment. There were a series of not our finest moments. Oh, hey, we all died for entirely avoidable reasons. Also, maybe we're bad at this. But the end result was, like, there was a boss that we had to try a number of different strategies on before we settled on one.
Admittedly, we settled on cheese, but...
Hey, look, time magic is awesome. Haste is great. We had
Amazing.
We had a boss that was flooding us with ads, and the first time we pulled it, we died incredibly fast to just an overwhelming number of ads. The second time we pulled it, we discovered that the fire circled on the ground would kill the ads immediately. But we couldn't quite get the ads in the fire while still killing the boss without all dying.
Because the fire would absolutely murder us, too.
Yeah, because the fire would hurt us, too.
Well, it would show up in completely random locations and, not stick around that long. So by the time you got the stuff to the fire, well, maybe it had vanished.
Yeah, so that didn't work super well. But then we realized the boss didn't have as much HP as we thought. So we pulled the boss to the far side of the room and hit every DPS buff and haste buff we possibly could and exploded the boss in like 10 seconds flat before the ads could chase us across the room. Which admittedly was hilarious.
It was kind of funny.
It was kind of silly.
And then
As a guardian, I don't really get to exercise that whole DPS thing very often.
Yeah. And then we were Ghostbusters. Like, straight
up. It also worked a lot better once we figured out how it worked.
Yes, that one did not go well until we figured out how it worked. But, like, we got packs that shot beams, and we were trying to eliminate this big ghost by pulling bits of it off and using it to charge these ghost traps. And once the ghost traps were charged, we could basically use them to make the boss vulnerable, because the boss was a ghost. I thought that was a neat fight, and also satisfying to actually coordinate and win. That felt pretty good.
It's one of those where I'm not sure how you would do that without voice communication.
I have no idea.
It would not be easy. I mean, if you knew going into it what you were supposed to do, I mean...
Yeah, that
because we finally determined was that the gun had two beams, one of which would lift things and one of which would pull things when they were lifted. So you had to have one person lift and the other person pull simultaneously.
Yeah.
And then there would be a cooldown on the ability that you had used, so you'd need to swap.
Yeah, so yeah, if you had like two people, then whoever was lifting had to switch. So they were pulling, and so you'd sort of switch off and...
Well, and something was killing the slimes, the ectoplasms.
They were very short-lived.
Yeah,
Okay.
they didn't live very long. And they the slimes on their own, the like ghost slimes that we were pulling off,
They go back to the boss.
They try to go back to the boss because they were part of the boss. So you'd have to like pull them away from the boss and cram them into these ghost traps to charge them up.
Well, and we also learned that it was not a good idea to charge a ghost trap, DPS the boss, charge a ghost trap, DPS the boss, because it seemed like we weren't all working on the boss at the same time, so we didn't get full burn value out of that. So instead we charged all the traps and then focused on the boss.
Yeah, pulling the boss into trap after trap to get burn phases.
Once we finally got it, it only took us 2 out of 3.
That's true.
Yep.
Well, and what was weird about that, it was like, that boss was crazy. The other one really wasn't, like, I don't remember it being that horrible. Like, I think we died on
its
it.
own abilities were not bad.
It was all the ads that it
All
was
the
summoning.
ads.
I don't know what the third boss in there is like, but I know it had a stupid name.
Yeah.
It had an amazing name. I don't know what you're talking about.
We couldn't figure out how to get to the third boss. Like, in theory, it might be openable, and because I thought the whole point of the exploration mode was that you could go do all of it in one setting.
Not all in one trip, unfortunately.
Really?
Each one has like its own mini quest path. We just happened to come across one of the other ones.
Which I was fine with, because then we didn't have to do all the madness that was probably leading up to that step.
Exactly.
Like, we just fought the boss. There was a lot of stuff that was just running around the dungeon doing stupid stuff, fighting horrible things.
Yeah.
There was a section that was a lot like the Elysium in Blackrock Depths, where there was just like this giant area of tons of ads.
Big area with wandering packs, and one thing in every pack was a little bit stronger and would spawn more ads really aggressively. And if you got more than, like, I think a couple of times, once we figured out what we were doing, we could take 2 at once. But one of those early pulls, we got like 3, and it was
Got
just
3,
terrible.
didn't realize what was going on, got swarmed, died.
Yeah, like, died real bad. But yeah, between that and the fractals having a fairly clear progression path, I sort of felt like there were a bunch of really interesting, things that I kind of wanted to see more of.
Well, like, so up until this point, Guild Wars 2 felt like a lot of icing without any cake.
Yeah.
And now, like, seeing this group content, I get it. Like, this is decent group content. And the other thing that I had to fight with was all this time I've been, like, really thinking of it in traditional MMO terms. And I think that's the trap, is this looks like an MMO and features some functionality, but it's much more like a Guild Wars 2 or a Borderlands, or where it's an online grouping game, but it doesn't fit a lot of the traditional style of an MMO.
Yeah. It's really a lot more like, it is a small group multiplayer game, but it is not an MMO in the way that you might think of an MMO.
Well, and another good comparison is like Destiny. Destiny is a game made up of a bunch of vignettes. And the vignettes are really fun, but they're not as detailed as a traditional MMO. So, like, Destiny Strikes, while dungeon run-ish, are way shorter generally and have way fewer mechanics, and are designed to be, taken on in bite-sized chunks. And I think a lot of the content in Guild Wars 2 is kind of similar.
Yeah. But there's also these, like, fairly interesting long-term goals.
Well, and another problem that I had that I talked about last time we spoke about the game was that I felt like in full exotic gear, I really had no place to go. And Fractals opened up that new place to go with the Ascended tier of gear.
Yeah. Like, Ascended gear is this thing you can work towards and also can drop.
Unless your bell is not going to drop.
I don't know. So reports that I've heard is that you can get them to drop. I mean, it's going to be hard to get a full set that way, but you can certainly get drops. And
Actually, they're not that uncommon out of the daily chests. But other than that, I feel like the answer is you need Bell's luck.
Man, I try really hard to downplay the luck thing, but
it's really a thing.
It's a thing.
I don't know why. I'm not doing anything weird. But yeah, I have 2 legendaries in World of Warcraft. And I am catching hell from Grace because of it on a regular basis.
Yep, I have yet to see one, so I'm still bitter.
But of note, like, we ran 2 mythics in a row earlier, and I didn't get any usable loot. So I think I'm just saving up all my luck on the RNG and getting it all delivered at once.
I had the Guild Wars equivalent of my luck happen, because I commented previously that I'm mostly not lucky unless me being lucky can cause suffering in someone else or cause suffering in a person, and that has definitely occurred to me. Except that the person suffering is me. I got a legendary precursor item drop, and the legendary weapons, other than looking really cool, aren't actually better than Ascended gear.
Ascended gear that you can change the stat loadout of whenever you want.
Yeah. Yes, you can. It's Ascended gear where you can swap the stats around. And to get an Ascended weapon is like roughly 9 days of work, depending. And a lot of that is a result of cooldowns on crafting things. Legendaries are months of doing every type of game content. So I have this thing in my inventory that's like taunting me to start on this madness quest.
Well, I mean, legendaries are basically the modern equivalent of EverQuest.
Yes.
Epic quest or weapons.
Yes.
I mean, and those literally were, multi-month long processes that took an entire guild to get.
Yeah.
Each one.
Yes. In this case, it doesn't require an entire guild to get, but it's still a multi-month process of I hope you are capable of doing every type of content in the game, because you have to.
The only content you need to do is you need to do World v. World, and you need to do enough PvE to map complete. You'd have someone to make gold.
Yes. So I have to do everything in every zone. or at least everything in every vanilla zone, and I have to do enough World v World to get the, what is it?
Gift of Battle.
Gift of Battle.
Completion of one reward track, so it's not actually that bad.
That's fair.
I think it used to be a lot more complicated before they added reward tracks.
Yeah. But then I have to do a whole bunch of really specific things as well, depending on what legendary I'm building.
But you kind of cut out the middleman in a lot of ways.
This is true. Yeah, the precursor cuts a bunch of steps out of the whole legendary crafting thing, in that it's a perfectly functional item on its own, as opposed to a bunch of garbage that you're collecting and trying to turn into something that isn't garbage.
But not only is it a perfectly functional item on its own, in order to get it in a non-random fashion, you would need to do a bunch of stuff, which involves really even more of every type of content the game has to offer in very specific formats, like some world bosses, some particular fractals.
What did you even get it to drop off of?
They can drop randomly off of virtually anything.
Anything that might give you a level 80 exotic. So anything.
Yes. I happened to get mine off of a world boss chest.
Like those dragon chests that we did earlier.
Yeah. It was in one of those like leaf pod sacks, I think.
Honestly, I think that probably the biggest thing that Guild Wars 2 has going for it is the fact that, well, so it's a double-edged sword. Like, the fact that you can literally play the game without spending anything other than the initial purchase. And even then, I think you can play vanilla now for free, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to pay any money to play the vanilla version of the game. And if you buy the expansion, they give you a little token to max out a character, because all of the content in the game is still relevant even if your character is max level. And if you have a max level character, you can do a whole bunch of stuff, like play with your friends, and they seem to want to encourage that, which I appreciate.
Well, I mean, and we praised World of Warcraft's Legion scaling, and I think really the first game that I played that did it well at all was Guild Wars 2.
Yeah.
I wouldn't describe what it was before as done well.
Yes,
I died because of their level scaling a whole lot.
That's another thing that they have tweaked a lot.
Previously, I had the experience of pulling level 12 Earth Elemental, and it crossed an invisible border, and suddenly I'm level 5.
Oh, Lord. No, I don't remember that.
I was not happy about that.
Yeah.
It did not only happen in one place either.
Yeah, it was those.
Well, and it's probably especially bad in the starter areas because
levels mean more. Yeah.
Yeah, like because you had the like 1 to 5 area, and then the 5 to 10 area, and they were really close to each other.
Yeah. But my experience leveling up characters now has been definitely not that.
So I'm not sure I can speak very well with my experience of leveling up characters now, because I haven't played levels 1 to 20 on a character since I came back.
Okay, this is fair.
So, like, the only real improvement that I would love to see that they'll probably never do is, so far, for me, the most interesting content is Fractals. And it would be nice if you could do those sub 80. As in, you could just grab some random person and bring them in on whatever level. Because, like, when we were doing them the other night, there was the character that Kodra had at 80, and then there was the character he actually wanted to play.
Yeah.
That was sub 80. And it would have been nice for him to be able to drag the character he was caring about for the moment, instead of, oh no, we need your big kid to do this.
Yeah, and I guess in fairness, we didn't actually try to bring a lower level character in, but the impression that I got was that it wasn't a thing.
It's weird. Like, level scaling is, after like the first several levels are pretty linear, like surprisingly so. So like there isn't that much of a difference between like level 75 and level 80.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference in the gear they can wear.
Oh! Characters are adjusted to level 80.
Oh!
In Fractals?
In Fractals?
In Fractals. Levels 1 to... no. Yeah, it says characters are adjusted to level 80 within the dungeon.
So it acts like World v World then.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so...
That makes it a hell of a lot more
now
interesting.
We know.
Yeah, alright. That's pretty cool. I think that's neat. Also good to know.
Because to some extent, it fills the same niche as the Dungeon of the Dead. If that's true, like if you could run in at whatever level.
The Palace of the Dead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That would just mean you were missing, not quite as good, but you'd be missing traits, you'd be missing potentially skills.
well, so if you went in at 20, you would at least have like all of your item abilities unlocked and like your weapon abilities.
But you wouldn't have traits and you wouldn't have your elite.
Yeah, but I would imagine you probably go through levels real quick in the Fractal.
Probably. You go through levels real quick doing literally
Anything else?
everything. Like, I mean, in the 3 weeks I've been back, I've leveled how many characters? From 40 to 80 or high, and yeah, I've leveled at least 3 max level. I've got leveled at least 2 characters to max and 2 more to an appreciably high level without like going super crazy with it.
I guess I'm curious, Thalen, what your take was, because like you had never played Guild Wars 2 until recently, right?
Yeah, I mean it was neat. I was mostly very confused
This
because
is fair.
I started a character and played a few levels and ended up advancing it all the way to level 80, and I've got gear that I don't know. Nothing that I've looted since then is even remotely close to the gear that I currently have, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with the crafting materials I've gotten. I don't really know how my skills interact.
Yeah.
So
I can see that. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm benefiting from the fact that I played originally. I'm not sure what I would think if I were just plunked down in the middle of it now.
Yeah, one of the things that I definitely did was I picked a character, I leveled it to 80, and then immediately played a different character to re-get a feel for things.
yeah, I feel like maybe I ought to do that.
But I found that I picked up what was going on a lot quicker than I would have leveled.
I think one of the hardest things that's going on in that game is that not only is every class unique, every weapon that every class has is unique. So, like, Greatsword may be an amazingly useful weapon for this class, but is kind of horrible for another class.
Yeah.
And that's a really weird thing, too. Like,
Every weapon you're wielding does dramatically different things based on what class you are.
That too. Thieves and Rangers are the only 2 classes that can use short bow, and they don't use it the same way at all.
No. Rangers,
I mean,
what?
the
poison
best
people
examples
with
here
them?
are Revenant Hammer and Mesmer
Yes.
Greatsword.
Yes. Yeah. Like, Greatsword, mostly a weapon that you use to, hit people really hard. For Mesmers, it's a laser beam. Like, it's a ranged weapon.
Used to generate big pink laser beams, mostly.
Yeah, I shoot people with giant Death Star pink laser beams out of my greatsword. That's really strange. Also, I'm a mage with a greatsword, which is itself kind of strange looking. That's before you get into stuff like the elementalist attunements, where it's like, oh, if I press this button, I explode people in fire. If I press this button, now I'm a healer.
So I actually have seen that. They only introduce those to you one at a time.
Oh, that's probably
So you
good.
start the game with only fire attunement, and then I think you get water after like level 10 or so.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing. Work your way up to the more complicated ones. But yeah, if you ever wanted to be able to pick, I mean, granted, you need different gear if you're going to play as a healer versus as a DPS, but it's largely sort of. I wonder if you could manage to split the difference.
I mean, that's what Celestial Gear is for, but that's only really good for classes that can make use of all stats. So
Sure,
basically either an Elementalist or a Guardian.
Yeah, but could you get like power, precision, healing power? Like, that would synergize nicely.
Probably.
Because then it's like, okay, I can blow people up and I can heal people. And like, I'm giving up some things in order to do that. Like, most of my defenses. But, being crazy strong at either one of those. But yeah, there's a lot of... It's been really interesting, because this was a game that I know I had written off, I know Coder had written off. I definitely
I always wanted to like it. I just didn't.
Yeah,
Like I have probably spent more time playing than the rest of you guys, just because I kept poking my head back in and seeing if it was something I wanted to play, and then deciding nope, it's not.
Yeah. But getting in and seeing, like, this is what they do with group content now, and this is the progression, and like these are the kinds of things that you're working towards.
This is like a night and day improvement.
Yeah. And it's really easy to play casually, which I like. It doesn't have I think you described it as a thing that Rift does, Belle, where you feel like you feel like you can't play, you don't want to play as much Rift as you need to in order to do the things that you want to do in Rift.
Yeah, and like the biggest problem that I have with Rift is that in order to do some of the things I want to do, I need people. Like I need a lot of people to do them.
Yeah.
And a lot of that same level of interaction is just happening out in the wild. And the events are way more complicated than they used to be. Like back in vanilla, it felt like they were in a large part, go kill these things in this specific area, or go collect things in a specific area, or escort these really dumb yaks or bulls or whatever equivalent of that is. And now, like the world event thing that was going on the other day in Maguma with the big dragons that spawn in the treetops, that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, their events have gotten more involved and more interesting, and require like they require zone-wide communication and coordination, but they also have degrees of success.
Well, we have rattled on about Guild Wars 2 for a while. Anybody else have final thoughts before we move on to something else?
Not really.
Sounds like a no.
Not really.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing more of what's going on and what the game has to offer, and that's something that I haven't previously been able to say, and that's really exciting to me.
So, another thing that happened this week is with the launch of Rise of Iron and Destiny, the Iron Banner returned this weekend, and I spent some time playing it. And more than anything, Rise of Iron tweaked a lot of the things that were already working. For example, in the past with Taken King, when you repped up a faction, you would get a package, and the package would have something in it that was useful. And at the beginning of Taken King, there was a chance of getting something cool, but it was pretty minimal. Then towards the end, they made it so with their smart loot system, you would always get an upgrade from this package. Meaning that items would drop at a minimum of whatever your converted light was, your average light. So, like, if you got a primary weapon and you had, like, a 355 primary, but you only had 350 light on average, you could get, like, a 352 weapon. So it wasn't necessarily always going to be an upgrade, but the chance was much higher than it had been previously. With Rise of Iron, they made it so when you rep up with one of these factions, you get to choose what kind of package you want. So you can say, I want a weapon package, or I want an armor package. And that's helped a bit to kind of direct what loot you're getting. Similarly, they've tweaked Iron Banner quite a bit. So previously, you could wear all these different items to gain rep faster. So if you had the shader equipped, you would get additional reputation. If you had the emblem from the Iron Banner equipped, you would get additional reputation. If you had the class item with the Iron Banner logo on it, you would get additional reputation. And the unfortunate of this was, like, veterans were highly rewarded for already having all these things each time the monthly contest rolled around. But first timers, it really sucked because it was noticeably slower to gain.
It was definitely frustrating for me when I was playing through that for the first time.
Because, like, you can't even buy the emblem until you've hit rank 1. And you can't buy the shader until I think you had hit rank 3. So
At
you're
least,
just
yeah.
you're just going to have to suffer through until you can get your ranks. This time around, they completely overhauled this. Also, there were daily quests and weekly quests. And the weekly quests were extremely hard, or at least I thought they were hard. Like, for example, one of them, in order to complete one of the weeklies, was that you had to hit first place in a match.
And some of them, I mean, even some of the other ones, I just didn't even bother doing. Like, there were some where you had to, like, get the heavy weapons, which meant you had to race people to get them and get a kill with them, you know, in a battle, and it was just, I don't know.
Right.
I
So
had a frustrating time with some of those.
well, yeah, and the heavy weapon kills were always the worst because you had to have, I think, 10 heavy weapon kills during the course of a game.
Can you
And
even get 10 heavy weapon ammo over the course of the game?
well, no, not during the course of a game, but just like 10 to complete the quest.
Okay.
And one heavy weapon chest spawns during the course of an 8-minute game. And there is one spawning of heavy weapon ammo, and there are 2 chests that appear in the map. So everyone makes a race for those 2 chests. So yeah, like you had to either be really lucky or really good to get heavy weapon ammo to get your 10 kills in so you could finish off that bounty. And those bounties were a significant way of gaining faction to push through the levels, because how Iron Banner works, and I've talked about this in the past, is every tournament you start back at rank 0. And the goal is to hit rank 5, and you're given, in the past you were given a package at rank 3 and a package at rank 5. And inside of those were good items, like really nice gear. What has changed instead is there were, I believe, 5 quests in total that were weekly quests. And all of them were completable lots of different ways. So, for example, you had to participate in a certain amount of Iron Banner. And I don't remember exactly how the point system worked, but basically just playing a match moved the bar forward. So like just playing a match earns you 10 points of the 100 points needed to finish this bounty. If you won a match, you got 30 points. So ultimately you needed to, win 3 matches and at least play 4 if you wanted to do it the quickest possible way. Or you could just simply play 10 matches and you completed that bounty. So no more have to be top point scorer for your team or things like that. The other cool thing is when you completed one of these bounties, you were given a package just right then. You had 2 that were weapon bounties and 2 that were armor bounties. So it felt like this time around it was a lot less grindy than the first time. I earned faction a lot faster. I haven't finished it off yet, and supposedly there's another really nice package at rank 5 when you do finish up. About halfway through rank 4. But so instead of dailies, you basically have 1 set of bounties per character. So it doesn't feel like you have to keep logging in to play every day, which is part of why I haven't completed yet, because, I completed all the others in one night, and that got me to rank 4.5.
I feel like that sounds like an improvement, like a huge. Because the thing that you're originally describing is not something that I think I would want to play.
Well, it was
the first incarnation that I experienced of it was okay. Doing the daily bounties, like some of them were fine, and so I would just kind of did as much as I could, and I got through a couple of ranks, but I never finished it. But I mean, it's definitely a game. It's a kind of game that wants you to be engaging in this PvP activity, and competitive PvP things are not my favorite thing in the world. I still had an okay time doing it, even though it was terrible. So, but it's really encouraging to hear that being able to actually complete all of the quests or bounties, whatever, are, it's actually feasible to do that even if you're terrible like me.
Right. I mean, it basically all of the bounties felt like it was no longer skill dependent, but just simply putting time into Iron Banner on a character would get you through all the bounties. So like the kills one is you were scored 1 point for kills with a primary, 3 points for kills with a secondary weapon, and 5 points for kills with a heavy. So if you're getting heavy kills, you'll get through that bounty quicker, and you had to fill up the bar to 100. So they did things like that where, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go get the heavy chest or you have to camp the special ammo chest. Just simply getting some kills in and like doing any damage on it counted as a kill. So like even if you got assist credit, not just primary kill credit where you finish the person off, I got credit towards the quest. One of them was specifically assisting other players. And that one was easy to get. Like that was one of the first ones I completed because like a lot of the group fights, you're not necessarily getting the kill yourself, but you're at least scoring a hit on somebody during a fight. The other thing that made this Iron Banner weird was they debuted the new Supremacy game mode, which is, I'm not sure if I've played a game like this before in PvP, where essentially when you kill a player, they drop a seal or a crest, and you collect the crest and you score points for your team. You can also go pick up your teammates' crests if they die to deny the other team points. But what that ends up doing is it makes every engagement super close quarters. And there were a lot of situations where you're running in and like trying to get those seals just to deny the team points. So like if you run in and are able to pick up like one of their seals and 2 of your team seals, but then you die in the turn, it's a net win, because you denied 2 scores and scored 1 yourself, even though now they're going to get 1 off of you. So it leads to some weird logic in how you engage.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be hard. It sounds like it would be unintuitive to follow.
Yeah, but I mean, I like running around with a shotgun, so it's definitely a pro shotgun game mode. But the big takeaway that I have from Rise of Iron at this point is, having played quite a bit of it, is it feels like it's easier to get rewards. Like in vanilla and even in Taken King, there wasn't much gear reward for doing open world stuff. I mean, you could get blues, and there was a rare chance of that blue turning into something that you could use as infusion fuel to level up another weapon. But you weren't really going to get anything you were actually going to use from it. So you're mostly relying on strikes and crucible and things like that to get weapons and armor to use. What they did this time around is all of those world events, when you participate in them, you're actually getting legendary Ingrams, and I've even gotten an exotic Ingram off of a world event. So they actually feel like they're worth doing, instead of everyone just ignores that event while it's going on because there's really no point in participating. So
those are always the most frustrating for me, when there's like, oh, this is a cool thing that's just not worth doing.
Right. And honestly, like, there are a lot of people giving Bungie crap for Rise of Iron because, like I said in the first show, I mean, it feels recycled at least a little bit, because it's a lot of assets you've already seen remixed in different ways. But the gameplay itself is really fun. Like, they've tweaked the rewards and the interaction of content just enough to make it feel fresh again. And I mean, it's still very much Destiny. Like, it is not going to be unrecognizable by anyone. It is the same game that they either loved or didn't love. Namely, like, in terms of Rise of Iron, not versus like Taken King. It's not, vanilla is still a long ways off. Like, Taken King changed the game for the better. Rise of Iron didn't do anything nearly as revolutionary, but it tweaked it enough to make it feel good again. I mean, I have some problems with some of the things they did, but only because I was already right up against. I mean, I had hit the level cap before I stopped playing, so I didn't have as far to gain once Rise of Iron came out. Basically, I had 5 levels before I started hitting level cap type territory.
Got it.
So like blues will only go up to 340, and I was at 335. So I have to do content to get rewards. So it has to be a purple item or an exotic item for me to really even see any benefit of it. But it seems like there's a lot more stuff that rewards legendary items, which are the purples. Can I just say how confusing it is for that game to use legendary as its purple and exotic as its orange? Which I guess technically Guild Wars 2 uses exotic as its orange.
Legendary is like its own color.
Yeah. But the big thing with Iron Banner is like the previous incarnation, every 3-4 matches I was seeing, actually more often than that, probably every 2 to 3 matches I was seeing purple items in the rewards at the end of the match, each time bumping the light up a little bit. So that's mostly why I participate in them, is they're a great way to get light levels. Because like right now I'm rocking a 355 weapon, which was way better than anything I had going into this weekend.
Yeah, I need to sit down and give that game another shot, given the changes that have happened to it.
I mean, Taken King really was its Loot 2.0.
Yeah.
I mean, it tweaked all of the big problems I had with the game. And as they continued through the patch cycle, they just kept removing more of those obstacles. Like the biggest change that they made was the changes to the infusion system. Previously, like when we first played and you wanted to level an item through infusion, and I don't even know if we got that many legendary items back then.
I didn't get any.
Actually, infusion didn't
never got
exist
any.
until Taken King. Yeah, infusion didn't exist until Taken King. So you can basically take an item that you like, that you enjoy the stat loadout on, that you enjoy the way it performs, and keep feeding items into it to increase its level. And previously, this was a very lossy process. The most you could hope to gain off of an infusion was about 4 light levels, which meant you were really grinding your way to higher levels on these weapons. So towards the end of the patch cycle for Taken King, they put in a patch that made it so that if you have a level 300 weapon and you're putting a level 335 item into it, that weapon becomes level 335, just straight up.
Huh.
And that helped a lot, because I used to have a bank full of infusion fuel, as we called it, to work lower level items up to appropriate light levels. So it might take, like, and there were infusion calculators that would tell you, okay, based on what you have in your bank, this is the most efficient. Yeah, this is the most efficient path you can take to get this to the maximum light level. And it was better than constantly throwing weapons away, but not by much. And what they've done with year 3 is basically, unlike the transition between year 1 and year 2, aka vanilla to Taken King, they're pretty happy with the way they do items now, and everything from year 2 is viable in year 3. So you can keep infusing your year 2 stuff up to year 3 levels.
Like I mentioned when Bell first said that, there's no Galahorn they need to fix the mistake of this time.
Right, and they brought back Galahorn.
I know they did, but not in a completely broken fashion.
No, it is a less broken Galahorn than the original.
That sounds potentially really great, considering that one of the things I remember when we were originally playing Destiny, one of the comments that I had was I really wish that it had more variance in the performance of its guns in a more Borderlands style of way.
And the thing was, it did. We just never saw it because,
Yeah.
well, we never got there.
You never got to see the really interesting guns because honestly, the leveling blues all feel exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, and I remember the point at which I distinctly remember the point at which I left Destiny was the point where I was like, I can't do the things that makes sure I get better gear, but I don't have gear. Like, I don't have the gear to do the stuff that I know gets me better gear. But my gear is too good to get anything useful out of the stuff I can do.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. It's like, there's nothing for me to do.
Well, you could have gone to a loot cave. That was basically what there was to do at that point.
Yeah.
That was the primary way players were looking at to fix that particular problem.
Yes, I have opinions about that.
Also the fact that at that point, legendary engrams did not necessarily guarantee you got a legendary.
That also.
And actually, that's another thing that I've noticed this expansion is things upgrading into the next higher tier happens a lot more often. So, like, the blues that I get out in the world, even though I said nothing I can get from a blue that's blue is really useful to me anymore, I am regularly getting them to upgrade into legendaries.
What?
And those are useful.
Wow.
I've gotten earlier last week I opened 2 legendary engrams and got exotics off of both.
Well, I don't think that happened ever.
No. Like, even in Taken King,
possible when we were originally playing.
Even in Taken King, it was kind of rare that you were ever going to get an upgrade off of an item. So, like, maybe out of 50 blue engrams I opened, I would get 1 to turn legendary. But now it happens pretty regularly. Enough that if I open a stack of blues from just a night roaming around the new patrol areas, it's pretty unusual that I don't get at least a couple legendaries. My biggest complaint so far is that it still feels like I'm moving really slow because I am 351 light and the new cap is 385, and that's not even a hard cap. You can technically get to 400 light, but it's super hard. So the difference between where I am and where the new cap is massive, and it's going to take a lot of running stuff to get there.
Yeah,
and not that I mind because I'm constantly moving a little bit at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question there is there stuff that you can't do because your light isn't okay?
I could not do heroics until recently, and like heroic strikes.
Yeah,
and I just recently, I still can't raid. Like, I'm a long ways off from raiding.
Got it.
And I'm like, I have friends that would love for me to get up to 365, which is basically the raid limit or the intro to raiding type level.
Yeah, but like there doesn't sound like there's a lot that you can do to really hasten that process.
And honestly, probably the easiest way for me to get my light up is to do Crucible, because Crucible does not care about light level, which causes some weird things to happen. So, like, you will sometimes encounter some of those broken year 1 weapons because it does not, like, it scales everything to, it's kind of like World versus World in Guild Wars 2. Everybody gets scaled to a equivalent gear level. Iron Banner, on the other hand, takes people's light level into account. So that's probably also part of what makes Iron Banner hard, is if you are low light level, you are definitely feeling the difference between you and the other people. But as far as things I can do, every week there is a series of quests that I can do, and they all reward legendaries. And then there's other content that I could be doing if I was really devoting, nightly playing Destiny.
Right.
I would have already been to 385 if I was really playing as much Destiny as I have at other times.
Got it. But there's still like it's like there's stuff you could do, and that stuff feels worth doing, and also like there's something useful to do.
Right. I mean, it's enough to where, like, pretty much every night once I get home from work, I at least pop on for a little bit and do a few things, and in doing so, I feel like I've moved the bar forward a little bit.
Yeah.
Because either I get a piece of usable gear or I get Glimmer, which is their currency, that I can then buy something with and turn in for faction rep and move that bar forward, because every time I rep up a faction, I get another package that's worth something. So there's like a bunch of little things I could be doing to move forward. And I haven't even gotten into any of the new really serious quests. Because like they this time around they instituted the exotic weapon quests again. So to get the new Galahorn, to get the Kvostok, to get Thorn 2.0, you have to do a sequence of things in the world.
So while I'm not surprised they managed to bring Galahorn back in a fashion that is not completely broken, I am surprised that they decided to bring Thorn back.
They also managed to bring it back, and from what I've heard, a state that is not broken. There's a lot of stuff that's come in that counters Thorn. Like, the way Thorn interacts with players is no longer as unique as it used to be.
Got it.
So another thing that came up this week that I think might be an interesting discussion point is lately I've tried really hard to leave games on good terms so that I can come back without a lot of baggage to play if, the spirit so moves me. And mostly what I mean by that is, in the past, I would ultimately leave a game because I was pissed at it. Like, something would happen, either culturally or mechanically, that would piss me off, and I would cancel my account and then go do something else. And I've been trying really hard to start withdrawing before I get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never good to let yourself get burnt out.
I remember in WoW, especially early in like Burning Crusade Wrath, there were I remember watching a lot of people who would quit because they were just so burned out, like just brutally, incredibly burned out, and like, I mean, they'd go from playing WoW to not playing any games at all. And I don't know, and it's something that like I've been trying to do since then. Like I burned myself out really badly in vanilla WoW and have been really careful not to let that happen again. And so I leave when I start to feel that happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's something when I quit WoW a little over 2 years ago. I mean, part of the reasoning was I could see that moment coming. Like, I could see that I was starting to burn out, and I came to the realization that if I didn't leave then, I probably would end up hating the game.
Yeah.
And apparently it worked, because now I'm playing WoW again, because Legion.
Legion's good.
It is.
It is good. And like for me, like my oft repeated distaste for WoW is actually very little to do with WoW itself and more to do with the MMO industry as a whole.
The fact that everybody seems to want to try to recreate WoW.
Well, it's such a big elephant in the room that if you aren't WoW, it's very hard to be much of anything.
Yeah, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah, exactly. And it means that it means that there's like, and I've sort of made my peace with this, like, nobody's making new MMOs anymore. Just nobody's going to do it. We've seen the last few. They were really cool, but it's going to be a very long time before anybody decides to make those again.
Yeah, it's all mobile games now.
Well, it's a bunch of different things.
But that's where the social type games seem to mostly be now.
Yeah,
for what social element there is in most mobile games.
Well, and a lot of things that socially made MMOs unique and interesting are
they're just in everything.
Yeah, they're just in everything now.
Every game is a multiplayer game now, which occasionally drives me crazy because sometimes I just want to play a game by myself. In some games, you literally can't.
Well, and I think like we've seen so many of these hot trend periods in games, be it FPS or be it the current MOBA thing, where everything has to be some flavor of a MOBA. MMO was one of those, and I don't think the big thing is MMOs are being made still, They're just not being made in the Western market.
Yeah, there's that too.
Or more so, there are all these games that are absolutely MMORPGs, but are trying desperately not to be.
Yeah.
And Destiny, for example, it is absolutely an MMORPG. Like, the way it interacts with its players is the same as the interaction between, WoW and a WoW player. But it is trying really hard not to brand itself in those terms, even though everything from the sounds of it in Destiny 2 is going to be even more MMORPG-ish.
Yeah.
But MMORPGs became this dirty word.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly what I was going to say. It's nobody wants to call their game an MMO anymore. It makes me wish that there had been much in the same way that Battlefield and Call of Duty kind of had it out for several years and multiple generations of titles. I kind of wish that there had been any other, even just one other MMO from 2004 to now that had given WoW like a real run for its money, because I think both games would be better for it. Like, in-games competition is really, really good for players, and there's just not competition in the MMO space.
Well, and we haven't really seen a lot of serious back and forth competition in years. Once WoW came out, it was the king, and nobody could really catch up. I mean, Rift was absolutely made a better game because of other MMOs that kept coming out, but I mean, it has always had a smaller player base.
It always has other problems.
Right. So, like, the last time I can really remember two MMOs duking it out was EverQuest and Dark Age Camelot.
Yep.
And they did different things, but man, they were absolutely vying for each other's players.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember some of the early advertising taunting EQ for some of the features that Dark Age Camelot had.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen, or, not recently, but I had definitely seen games taunt WoW, but, like, it never felt meaningful. It was sort of like, oh, that's cute. Like, it's cute that you would take a pot shot at WoW, but we both know what's really happening here.
But I guess, what were you going to say, Tam?
Oh, I think it's really interesting, like, seeing which MMOs have stayed relevant and why, but mostly because they're very, very hard games to kill.
Yeah.
Caveat here is apparently unless they're run by NCSoft.
Oh man, people are so salty about City of Heroes for good reason.
Yeah.
But that's one of those where I really wish that I couldn't see I wish I couldn't understand what was actually going on there, because from knowing what was actually going on there, or at least being able to, like, see the business side of it, I understand why that game was shut down, but man, is that awful PR.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so the problem with City of Heroes being shut down, this is a game that we all can fondly remember, but at the point at which it was shut down, I knew no one who was actively playing it.
Everybody, it had a very high number of people who really enjoyed poking their head in and smiling, and then going and writing some fanfic about it.
But, like, it was a game we all kind of fondly remembered, but much in the same way as summer camp. Like, it was a thing we did once, and it was cool, and it was really fun times, but... And I met a lot of awesome people through it. Like, I met Shiana through it. Well, actually, I knew Shiana just slightly ahead of City of Heroes, but still, like, I think I met Feeny, and I met, like, a bunch of people that I still see on a semi-regular basis. I met through City of Heroes, but man, none of us were still playing it. Like, we had moved on. It was a thing that it was a summer fling in the MMO history. And that's
this
all well and good.
Chain of mixed metaphors, by the way.
I know.
Like, is this like a summer camp fling?
Yeah, maybe.
All right.
But
had a way more interesting childhood than I did.
But it was a game that people fondly remembered, and all of the people I remember being up in arms about the cancellation of the game, they maybe had poked their head in, but nobody was seriously playing it. And that's the problem, is no one was seriously playing this game.
They'd pop in and pay for a month, like once or twice a year, and be really happy that this game was a thing that they could come back to and play.
Until one day it wasn't.
Yeah, and unfortunately that isn't a viable business model.
No, it's not. And that's what I was trying to lead to, is like, this is just not something that works. Like, I mean, you can't build a business around someday maybe somebody is going to want to play your game. You need people who want to play it all the time.
Yeah.
And I guess, okay, that leads back to the whole leaving games on good terms is, like, deep inside, I know I'm not getting new MMOs. Like, that's just not a thing that's going to happen. I also know that the care and feeding of the games that I do have, that I do remember fondly, is kind of important. So I need to be able to go back to them on good terms so that I can enjoy myself and really enjoy the time each time I poke my head back inside.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the thing that I did. I did sort of a little bit earlier this year was I found myself really missing being able to go and play MMOs that I really enjoyed, and not really having or feeling like I didn't really have a good outlet to play, and I went back to a whole bunch of old ones over several months. I went and I reinstalled Guild Wars. I reinstalled Tor. This year, this expansion, I even went back to WoW. Because there were a bunch of games that I left. I left, like you said, before I was burned out, and came back, and there were interesting things for me to do. And I took a hiatus from Final Fantasy when I felt like I was starting to get burned out. And so it's like, no, maybe I'm not playing one game continuously for years, but it also means that every time I come back to a new game, it's like I have a whole bunch of new game to play and discover.
Yeah, you're letting the game regenerate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and in some cases, the game that I return to is extremely different from the game that I left.
Right.
We also revisited this year.
The what?
Warframe is one of the ones we revisited this year.
Yeah, like Warframe. That was a game that I did not like at all when we first played it. And I think it's really cool now and a lot of fun. Guild Wars we talked about. Tor I played earlier this year because they basically changed the way you play that game entirely. And now that game is the KOTOR 3 I always wanted. I just straight up, that's what it is. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, and I haven't even really touched the Fallen Empire expansion, and now we have
Really good.
We have a whole new expansion that looks super interesting as well. Like, I feel like expansions are now the new MMO, and I don't know if that line of thought makes any sense at all, but like, I'm not gonna get new MMOs. But these expansions keep figuring out ways to tweak the games and make them work better in a lot of cases.
And sometimes change what you're doing significantly. I mean,
yeah.
I feel like once upon a time, an expansion that changed a lot about the game would have people with torches and pitchforks saying SWTOR or SWIG's NGE. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I definitely, hell, I remember for Burning Crusade, people were getting on that train because they were changing the way some of the classes worked.
Well, and right or wrong, WoW has conditioned us to accept overwhelming change between expansions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the legitimately good things that it's brought to the rest of the industry is these other games can make big, massive changes without totally alienating their player bases.
Yeah. So speaking of Star Wars expansions, that Eternal Throne trailer.
Before we started the show, Grace said she had opinions, and I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll start because I mean I think you guys were talking about it. I hadn't seen it until just before we started recording, and you guys sounded pretty favorable about it, and I think it looked really cool. It looks like I would like to watch that episode of a TV show or that short film, but I'm not sure it motivates me to want to play the game. And some of it is my past with SWTOR, coming into play, which like I loved for a really long time and left on really awkward terms, and have gone back to, when you guys were all kind of going back and playing through stories and things again, I went back as well and played through one of the class stories I hadn't seen, and enjoyed it, but it doesn't, at the state that it is in now, doesn't feel like the game that I remember enjoying, and it doesn't feel like the game I hated either. It mostly doesn't feel like much of an MMO at all.
Yeah.
And so like for you, that's actually a good thing. Because you just want to play through the story. But for me, I have all this other baggage of when I really enjoyed it, enjoyed the people that I was playing with, and now it's some other game, and it's probably still a pretty good game, but I don't know that it's a game that I want to invest a lot of my time and energy in.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm misinterpreting it, but it sounds like it sounds like kind of the like this game did you wrong and you remember it doing you wrong, and this new thing isn't the same game that did you wrong, but it's also not an apology for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of true.
Yeah, and so it's hard. It feels hard to get invested because it's like, it's like pretending that the old thing never happened.
Yeah,
quite frankly, I'm okay with it pretending that the old thing never happened, because I also feel that SWTOR did me wrong. That wrong's name is Soa.
Yeah.
See, and I even made it past the point of bugginess. When SWTOR did me wrong was really around the free-to-play conversion, and there were a lot of unpleasant things going on then, and some of them have been rectified, and a lot of them haven't. And I've now, like, when I went back again, I made my peace with the fact that it is not free-to-play, that it's really
Free-to-play model is please subscribe.
It's a subscription game that you could torture yourself playing for free if you really want to, but you don't want to. You really don't.
You can totally play the demo.
Yeah, it is not a game that has any semblance of a viable free to play model. It just doesn't. Like, no. If you are going to play this game,
model is please subscribe.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because like it is probably the most heinous free-to-play model that exists right now, because even EverQuest 2 and their horrible free-to-play model was done away with. Like, that was a game that said you could only equip this quality of gear, or you could only use this rank of spell. Yeah, like basically only allowed you to play with the horrible toys.
It was the embodiment of that old Penny Arcade comic. Hellgate London.
The Hellgate London one. Free-to-play users may not look upon paid users.
Basically.
Paid users may ride free-to-play players like mounts at any time.
But like, SOE used to have that kind of a thing, but even they saw the light that, no, this really wasn't working well. But apparently it's working for Tor. Like, I don't get it, but it's apparently working.
I mean, and I definitely have strong opinions about games with lock boxes and all of that other stuff too. Like, I don't want to get into a long conversation about horrible free-to-play models, but like, when you subscribe, the game is like perfectly playable and valid. It's not the game that I used to play, and it's not really even an improvement of the game I used to play. It's just some other game, and it's still pretty cool, and it's got a lot of cool Star Wars stuff in it and Star Wars stories. But also, I think because I never played KOTOR, I don't have as much of that baggage that makes me enjoy the stories in the way that I think a lot of other people do.
I can totally see that. Because that's a huge like what I like about what Tor is now is that I feel like I get to play KOTOR again.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I think part
that,
of it,
I probably would care.
I think part of it is like where we entered that game. Like for me, I never really liked the feel of Tor that much, like the actual gameplay of Tor. It always felt like I am having to play this WoW clone to play KOTOR. Like it was the story that really made me interested. And the dungeons were cool. Like some of them were really cool. And I enjoyed the story element of them, and I enjoyed getting to roam around in that world, but it never felt different enough from WoW to really make me latch on to it as its own thing. Like it was KOTOR in a WoW setting for me.
Yeah.
And now that the change happened, I feel like I'm mostly just playing KOTOR. Like it's just okay, now I get to focus on the story. That was the thing that I really enjoyed. And all of the time I spent leveling between story blocks was less enjoyable.
Yeah. And they've also kind of eliminated most of it.
But, I mean, SWTOR was a game I never raided in, so it was a weird place in my history.
Yeah, that's right. You did not raid with us.
Missed that whole travesty.
Huh.
SWTOR is my whole, I don't want to be a
interesting
raider
ideas.
anymore.
Yeah, I got to level 50 in SWTOR and did some daily quests and decided that, okay, I've finished the story. I guess I'm done now.
Well, I guess, I don't know.
On the topic of leaving games on good terms, I kind of wish I had done that.
With Tor?
Yes.
The at level cap game was just such a letdown as compared to the amazing ride that was the story was. Like I ate up like the Jedi Knight story. It was amazing. And then when I was done with it, I kept wanting them to patch more story in because that was the thing I was really interested in, and that was the thing that never really happened.
Kind of did with the Fallen Empire stuff, but that's
that was way later.
Yes.
Because like I didn't even make it to McCab. Like that, I did not stay in that long.
No, that was also years.
We disappeared sometime around the Rat Ghoul event.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing dungeon though. Like the Rat Ghoul Plague dungeon was phenomenal.
They did some really cool stuff. Ash puts it really well. They had some really cool ideas. They did not always work super well, but they had some cool ideas.
Well, and the other big thing that we ran into is like we ran out of things to do with a large group that was not raiding. Because like for a while we were, let's do world bosses, get people those achievements.
Yeah.
And then that kind of petered out because, we've done them all.
I'm surprised that we didn't raid together.
I didn't raid at all. Like I thought I was done being a raider.
Oh, right.
This was
This was post Lich King.
This was post Lich King. This was post me trying to raid in Rift.
Yeah.
And I was really just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to be a raider. I want to be a damn dirty casual.
It worked super well.
And it was a thing that worked for a period of time, but then I ran out of things I cared about and moved on to something else. I don't even remember what I went to after Tor.
Secret World, most likely. I think that was about the right time.
Yeah, probably.
Which one?
Secret World.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Because we still, to this day, aren't in the same guild in Secret World. That's something I probably should remedy next time I'm on.
That's a game that I did not leave on good terms.
Oh, not at all.
Secret World is really hard to go back to because it's really hard to tell what was added.
Yes. On-ramping for the new stuff that they've added is really hard to find, and it has that thing where I come back to it and I remember all of the things that frustrated me.
They haven't fixed the thing that drove me away, so whatever.
Yeah, exactly. They haven't fixed the thing that drove me away either. And that frustration is like, okay.
There are definitely elements of, nope, you play your class the wrong way.
You made the wrong decision when you were picking which weapons to use.
Yep.
I'm sorry. You have to essentially level entirely a character's worth of experience again before you can be useful.
Yep.
Because there's no respec. Actually, there may be a respec now. I don't know.
Seems unlikely.
It really wouldn't help.
Yeah.
I like melee.
Because eventually you can have all the points. So why would you need a respec?
See, that was definitely a game that I did leave on good terms. Like, I loved that game, but I just sort of hit the limit of what I could do by myself, and at the time I didn't have the energy to find a group of people to do stuff with, so I, as I often do, just kind of wandered away.
Yep.
Yeah, I always wanted to try some of the dungeon content in that, but
I don't
think I was ever playing the same time you guys were.
I think that some of the most fun I had in that game was running around the zones and running around questing in the zones as a small group.
We basically did that entire game story from 1 to 10, because it does have levels.
Lol.
As a group of 4.
Yeah, and it was great. It was incredibly fun. Like, that is, for all that what happened after that drove us away super sucked. Like, that experience is one that I find myself constantly chasing and trying to find a way to get again.
Well, and honestly, much the same as Tor, I will forever sell the praises of Secret World as a game to experience as a story. Like, I don't necessarily care about the end-game group content, but as a story, it is a great game.
Tor is also an example where I did actually like its dungeons. Like, dungeons, while leveling up, were really good.
Mm-hmm.
They had interesting mechanics. They had trash that existed to teach you the mechanics.
And did so very well.
And it wasn't punishingly difficult. Well, I guess Beyond kind of was. It was reasonable to learn within the dungeon without, it being entirely trial and error. But then you hit Nightmares, and they, on top of this, stick things like, we're just going to completely break your accuracy rating. So if you were focused on stacking it, well then, your spec was based on not missing. Well, you need to bring something else in here.
Yep. And by something else, we mean probably an entirely different weapon. Enjoy.
Right.
Yeah.
And in addition, they also ramped up all of the anti-melee mechanics such that you basically could not bring melee into Nightmares.
I find it super fascinating, by the way. Speaking of melee in metas, I find it really, really fascinating that the Guild Wars 2 meta is melee. It is one of the only MMOs I've seen where melee or short range combat is in meta and not.
Funny part is that if you.
But that is completely opposite of the way it was at launch.
Oh yeah.
That too, yes.
But no,
it's not that
totally the thing.
It's not so much that it's anti-ranged weapons; it's that you're stacking in melee regardless.
Yeah.
For the curious, the reason is because many, many, many classes have abilities that buff nearby targets.
Yep. Point blank AoEs.
So if you stack up a whole bunch, then you basically share all of these.
And buff stacking is the way to win.
Buff stacking is absolutely the way to win.
Yeah, buff stacking is very, very effective. It is how you create group synergy in a situation in which you don't have explicit classes with explicit roles necessarily.
Well, it feels like we're kind of winding down. Like that silence is going to get edited out, but that was a significant silence. Anybody else have any last thoughts before we wrap up for the night? I will take that long silence as no. Anyway, hopefully
You have to edit those back in.
No, I think we're fine without silences.
That seems like it.
Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the show. I'm curious about any thoughts about any of the topics that we discussed. We will do this thing once again next week with probably a whole other different series of topics.
Maybe.
Because God knows we won't have a clue what we're going to talk about until then. Anyway, good night.
Have a
Good night.
good one.
Good night.
Good night.